Today I'll be talking about the effects of livestock on climate change. So while livestock is not the biggest player compared to other sectors such as transportation or energy production, it still greatly affects our planet. And I do think it's a conversation that should be brought to the table more often. So that's exactly what I'm going to do today. So raising these animals is one of the biggest things that I would like to talk about because it requires so many of our precious resources, things as land and water. If you're wondering exactly how much land and water it takes, I will get right into that. So how much water are we using? Well, just to put it in, for one example, it takes 616 gallons of water just to produce a 4-ounce hamburger, which is insane. It also takes 330 gallons of water just to produce 8 ounces of chicken, 3 gallons of water just to produce 1 cup of lettuce, and 48 gallons of water just to produce 8 ounces of milk. If you think about all the water that we're using just to produce these different dairy items, think about how much it costs to just produce steak, chicken, pork chops, all these things that we're consuming constantly. All of that requires mass amounts of water, which we only have a limited supply of. How much land is being used? Well, livestock covers 45% of our global surface. That's all of America, Canada, most of Asia, some of Africa. It's the fact that half of our planet is being used just to raise livestock is insane. That land can be used for so many other precious things, or growing different types of vegetables and fruits, nuts, things that don't require as many resources. So now I want to get into the cost of livestock. The industry is worth approximately $1.4 trillion. So that's why people are so invested in it. It's more than just what it's doing to the planet or who it's feeding or whatever it may be. People have money in this and they don't really care what it's doing to the planet because of how much it's worth. Livestock alone provides 33% of the protein that's consumed globally. (4.2% of all GHG emissions come from livestock. 8% of all anthropogenic CO2 emissions come from feed crops and deforestation. So what exactly does this mean? What is GHG? What are anthropogenic CO2 emissions? I'll get right into that. So a GHG is a greenhouse gas. That's all that it stands for. And the main culprits are water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and ozone, which is naturally occurring. However, it is still one of our main players. And the anthropogenic greenhouse gases are just greenhouse gases that occur due to human activity or man-made greenhouse gases. So every time we use fossil fuels, our farming and forestry, which is what we're talking about, the cement manufacturing business, and aerosols. All of these combined really affect our environment, our ozone layer, our atmosphere, and I'll show you how. So what these do is when they get emitted into the air, they capture heat, which ultimately will warm the atmosphere and deplete our ozone. Now, this is pretty scary and very real. However, this is what they're doing, and we do need to take this into consideration when we're buying meat or thinking about growing cattle. So, if you think about driving by a pasture and you see a bunch of cows, think about all of the emissions that they're emitting. And a lot of people think it comes from when they fart. However, that's actually not true. It comes from their burps. So I call cow burps methane bombs because that's really what it is. So every time a cow burps, 90% of those methane emissions that they're emitting comes from that burp. And this is because of their diets. They eat mostly diets consisting of hay, grains, grass, and some proteins. However, all that roughage is really hard to digest, and it does make the cow burping and emitting all the methane into the air. So what does this have to do with animals? Well, let me tell you what methane is first. So methane is a greenhouse gas. It's a major contributor to global warming, And it's actually the second most threatening to carbon dioxide, which is what I think most people relate greenhouse gases to. Is you think about carbon dioxide, however, methane is a huge player in this. It makes up 15 to 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And what methane does, just like the other ones, it warms the atmosphere, and it could increase the global temperature by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2030, which really is not that far away. So what does a warming planet mean? Well, a warming planet is very terrifying. It means sea levels rising, our ice caps melting, our water supply depleting, and things like areas like wetlands and deserts will be greatly affected by this as well. And sea levels rising, it can potentially push cities back. One very common example people use is like Florida. The Florida can easily be consumed by water if these sea levels keep rising. Cities like San Francisco, New York will all be underwater. And if we don't stop the process, like that's a very, very real and will happen in the future. These ice caps melting also relate to that. They make the sea level rise, and they ruin the habitats of special creatures such as polar bears and penguins. And obviously, water supply is necessary. It's something everyone needs to survive. And if we keep contributing to this issue, these are very real problems that they're going to happen. It's not a maybe, it is they will. And I know this is all very scary, this is very intense, but don't panic, because there are things we can do to help maybe slow the process down a little bit and help alleviate some of the issues. So there are solutions for these problems. Scientists have found that by adding seaweed to only 2% of feed for cattle and sheep, it can reduce the methane emissions by 70%. So like I mentioned earlier, when these cattle are eating these diets of barley and grains, it's hard on their stomach and there's nothing in there to relieve. They need good bacteria to help digest all of that, so they reduce those burps that release all that methane into the air. And something as simple and abundant as seaweed is an easy solution that can easily be implemented into every cow's diet. Another thing we can do is just simply reduce the amount of the amount of meat that we consume by doing things like going vegetarian. And while a lot of people don't think that's a realistic option for them, they can start small by doing meatless Mondays. Or personally, I'm a pescatarian, so I eat fish maybe once a week or so, but I don't participate in eating meat, because I know exactly what it's doing to the planet. Another thing we need to look at is the type of animals that we are raising. Different animals are better adapted to different environments and would require less resources. And also, having more efficient animals that can produce more product would definitely help reduce with the issue. For example, a U.S. dairy cow produces over 22,000 pounds of milk per year, versus a Mexican dairy cow that only produces 10,500 pounds of milk per year. So if we had all of our dairy cows adapted like we do in the U.S., we would have less cows, same or more product, and it would help cut down the amount of cows that we are raising. And the last thing that I want to talk about is farmers really need to take a look at how they can better their relationship between livestock and crops. They can rely on each other. Livestock and crops can live as one. Crop residue can be used as feed, and manure is used as fertilizer. And also, the residues can be used as fuel, instead of fossil fuels, they can be used in lieu of, and it will greatly help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the things that we can do, things that you can take into consideration next time you go to the grocery store and you want to buy that delicious looking steak. Maybe consider doing something else, like going vegetarian, or maybe eating fish or something. So there are things that we can do. However, I think that the livestock issue when it regards to global warming, it's very real and it's happening, and it's a huge player in the problem. And I think that the more we learn about it and the more we talk about it and the more action we take, the better off our planet will be. Thank you very much for listening.